So today is working with objects and collections. We'll be working with employees schedule.xlsx, so go ahead and download that from Learning. All right, actually, you know what I might do? The three main collections of objects that we're going to work with today, we introduced today, is workbooks, worksheets within a workbook, and then shapes that are placed on a worksheet. And so I've recently been assigned to be the academic scheduler for the Marriott School, which means that I'm the guy who has to kind of resolve conflicts when two professors want the same classroom at the same time to teach their class. It is a thankless job. The only reason it's not just a terrible job. We're recording this. The only reason that I just don't think it's a terrible job is because I get to do things with VBA to kind of make this process go better, and I enjoy it. So we're not going to show everything here, but just this is like the schedule. This is fall schedule. So this tells me, and you actually can download this from the university system, and that happens automatically in this workbook. We should be able to find this class. Just search for me. Okay. Options. Okay. There it is. Tanner Building 210. Starts at 3:30, goes to 4:45. See, I can even shave off 5 minutes on the official schedule because I'm the one that sets the times and everything. We get out early every day. Oh, this must be 16.5. Oh, yeah, that's right, because this class is cross-listed. Some of you are in IS 520, some of you are in MBA 614. So this is the data that we get from the university. Can you imagine looking at this and trying to say, okay, when is a room available? This would be a nightmare. So what would be great is if I could use VBA to be able to look at this and give me a little more visual representation of this schedule. And so up here on the ribbon, I'm going to show you in this class how to do this kind of stuff on the ribbon. I'm just going to say, hey, I want to show the complete schedule for fall of that year. And so what it's doing then is it's reading through that data, and it's actually drawing lines, it's drawing shapes onto the worksheet so I can see where all of these classes go, and then labeling them. And so this gives me a list that is much easier to look at and say, gosh, I'm trying to find a room that's available starting at 3:30. Well, I can just kind of scroll over here now, and I can see not a whole lot that's available at 3:30, but here's one, room 230, is available on Fridays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, starting at 3:30. And so if someone needed a class, they can say, hey, that room's available. So I can do that visually quite a bit more quickly than I can do it just by looking at the data. Also, we could write other kinds of queries that would look at this data and answer that question by having the computer look through the numbers and find just the rooms that are available. But it's really nice to be able to look at this thing graphically. Okay, so this is kind of one of the neat things, and it's dealing then to be able to do this kind of stuff. We have to be able to manipulate the kind of objects, at least two of the three that I would like to introduce you to today, and that's working with worksheets in a workbook, as well as working with shapes on a worksheet. The computer in my office is dramatically faster than this one. It's a long time. Okay, so that's kind of where we're headed today. We're doing it in a more simplified version, but that's the goal. Yep.
Have you ever considered remoting your computer for the Hawaii network?
Have I ever considered what?
Remoting your computer through the network?
Oh yeah, like just doing a screen share on my desktop computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that. Yeah. But needing to record and having a microphone plugged in makes it better to do it this way. Anyway, it's I'm pretty happy with this machine. We're going to go. Okay. So let's go ahead then and begin with that file. I think I downloaded that file. Go to my downloads. Employee schedule.xlsx. So it's just a dramatically much more simple schedule. So we've got a set of 12, 6 different employees across 2 different days, and we have start and end time. And so this is the data that we'll be working with today. But first, we're gonna dive in and try to understand a little bit more about objects. Which I introduced the idea of an object to you last Wednesday when we were last together. Well, let's now go over it again. What do I founding quotes. Let me close founding quotes. And let me close book 1. And funk res. Okay. So first of all, we're going to be writing some code today. And so we're going to need to have a module. Now, so far, we've started off getting our code by recording a macro. And when we recorded the macro, the Visual Basic, or the macro recorder actually said, oh, we're going to be writing some Visual Basic. We've got to have a place to put that. And so it generated what's called a module. Since we're not starting off by recording today, we've got to put the module in by ourselves. And so step 1, the only place that I can put VBA code that will get saved with the workbook is in a module. There are different kinds of modules I can create. So let's just go ahead and make sure that we have selected the employee schedule workbook. And then let's choose Insert Module. Don't get a class module by mistake. That's something more advanced. The module is the kind that gets created automatically when we record a macro. Okay, so with this module in place, I can start to write some code. Now, if I'm going to write a macro by hand, what's the structure what's the structure it goes in? It's a sub procedure, just abbreviated sub. So we'll say sub, and I'm just going to call this object demo. The editor automatically makes the end sub, and so we feel pretty good about that. And so now we can write code right inside of this. Now, just as if we're just kind of testing things and trying to figure things out, one of the most useful tools is the immediate window. And so we can view the immediate window by choosing View, Immediate Window, or just pressing Control-G. And that will bring up just what's called the immediate window. This allows me to write output from my code out to here so I can kind of see what's going on, and I can go back and forth between here and this. So just for kicks, let's see how we would do that. I'm going to do a debug.print. Okay, now, this is the statement. This is going to say put something down here. In fact, if I put a 5, debug.print 5, if I execute that, clicking on the little green play button, it'll just print 5 down here to the immediate window. I can execute that a bunch of times. It just keeps printing 5 down to the immediate window. So debug.print is what says, hey, I'm just kind of trying to figure things out. I'm just debugging here. I'm going to print that out to the immediate window. In fact, debug here is an object, and print is a method. I'll talk more about that in just a second. For right now, I just want you to think, that's what you got to put to get something to go out to the immediate window. So now, let's look at a particular object. So there are literally billions of, there are billions of objects on this worksheet. Because every single cell here is an object. So I mean, how many rows do we have? We've got over 1 million rows, and we have XFD columns. How many columns is that? I don't know. It's a lot. So, but I'm down here in the very bottom right-hand corner. So there are multiple ways that I can refer to a particular cell in that worksheet. So I'm going to print. Just one way is just by saying I want to refer to the active cell. ACTIVEC. So active cell is an object. It is a thing. Some object is a thing that I can manipulate through code. Objects have properties and methods. Properties are just characteristics of the object, and methods are things the object knows how to do, like instructions that the object can carry out if I tell it to carry it out. So let's first look at some properties. So one of the properties of every range object, and that's what the active cell is, it's a range object, is that it has an address. And so what I'm saying here is I want to print the address property of a particular range. In this case, we're talking about the active cell. And that's XFD 1,448,500. So object is what comes before the dot, and then either property or method is what comes after the dot. Questions here? We don't have to just print the address. We could print the column number. That's another property. fact, maybe what I will do is I'm going to add a little text in here. Address of active cell. So now I'm printing this whole thing, which is part a string literal concatenated with whatever the address of the active cell is. So now as we're printing this stuff out, we'll see a little more descriptive information. Question?
So is address a property of active cell, or is it a method that you call on active cell?
It's a good question. So you, in a sense, we can't really tell by looking at it because they both are some object dot and then some word. This happens to be a property. Here's the thing: is that properties can never stand by themselves. So this address evaluates to this right here. This is like, or let's do this number right here. So that's column number 16,384. So that right there evaluates to that number. It would be equivalent to just putting this line or this number on a line by itself. Here's the thing, is that every line has to be a statement. It has to be an instruction that tells the interpreter to do something. This is a full instruction. It says print something. What's it going to print? It's going to print these characters with whatever the value of this address is. It understands that. Print this. This is an instruction. Print this. Now, if we get to this one, let's put the other one first. When we get to this one, is that an instruction? No, I mean, if I went up to you and said, print 16,384. If I told you to print 16,084, whatever this is, 384, you might not be sure exactly what I meant by that, but you would get it. I'm telling you to do something. You might not. The whole point is the interpreter understands the instruction. But what if I came up to you and just said 16,000? Yeah, it's utterly baffling. Because it's not an instruction. It's not an instruction that he understands or doesn't understand. It's not even an instruction. It's like, okay, 16,000. And so that's the thing, is that properties can never just be, they're not a statement. I've always got to do something with the property. I either have to print the property or do something with the value of the property, or I can put a new value into some property. Some properties I can actually write to, and we'll see some of those in just a second. But methods are instructions by themselves. So let's go ahead and put another method here. So let's identify a different range. We do range, why don't we say A1. Okay, now folks, when you hit that dot, it brings up the IntelliSense help. And this is basically everything that you're allowed to put after that object. It realizes, oh, this is a range object. Range objects have a set of properties and methods, and it lists them all for you right here. It's all of them. Now, you'll see they have different icons. The methods have this little icon right here. It kind of looks like some kind of rectangular shaped thing in motion. It's an object doing something. I don't know who comes up with these icons, but that's the best they could do. That's a method. That's an object doing something. This one, it just looks like a 3x5 card that somebody has given a finger to. And I just don't know. It's like a list of values. Anyway, so that's what they are. So one of them. So these ones with the little green thing. Those are the methods. They're instructions to do something, and then these other ones are the properties. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the one called select. This now is a full statement by itself because methods are instructions to the objects to tell them to do something that they know how to do. So this list of methods that comes up when I hit the dot, this is the list of everything that this kind of object knows how to do. It knows how to clear itself. It knows how to copy itself. It knows how to dirty itself. I don't even know what the dirty method does. It knows how to soil itself. If I'm I'm going to say select. I'm telling this object, go select yourself. And that's among the methods of the object. It knows how to select. So the thing I want to make clear is that a method is not some arbitrary list of commands that I'm telling an object to do. No, no, no. A method is something that object itself knows how to do, and I'm just telling it it's time to do that functionality that you already know how to do. There's a question over here? Yeah.
Is there a difference between select and activate?
Is there a difference between select and activate? Yes. One starts with an S, the other starts with an A. In the olden days of VBA, you selected ranges and you activated sheets. And if you tried to select a sheet, it would say there's no method for that. And I think, it's like, kind of selecting and activating is the same thing. And so what they did was they actually said, oh, well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and make an activate method for a range and just make it do the same thing as select. And they made a select method for a sheet, do the same thing as activate. So they're really synonyms to each other. So far as I can tell, I've never been able to find any difference in their behavior. The question over here? Yeah.
Is there a possibility of ever getting the properties and the methods confused?
Oh yeah, definitely.
How can we keep those separated? Because I understand, like in these few examples, like the verb is the method, but when we're looking at code, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that you might get some sense that methods are typically named as actions, whereas properties are typically named not as actions, they're just like nouns. Yeah. But that's not always going to help you because there'll be some of these words. You look at dirty and you go, you just saw that. I don't know. Go your way. And so, yeah, and there really are some methods that return a value the same way that a property, just gives me a value. And so it can look, for the whole world, it can look just like a property. And so I guess all I can say is that it's not going to be really ever critical for you to distinguish that, except for like on the midterm exam, where I may give you some examples. But they would be ones that are really clear, where we're actually plugging a value into a property. We'll kind of get more familiar with this. Okay, so here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to print these two lines again right after I do the select. So this is going to start off by saying, whatever the active cell is, print the address in the column, then select a different cell. So I've got a new active cell, and so I should get the answer to the column of that cell as well. So we'll go ahead and run that. And now I've got the address column. We then change the cell, I get the new address, and then the column. All right, well here, let's go ahead and change some properties there. So let's say that the value, let's do range. Again, let's identify it by a different way. There's another way to identify a particular cell, and that is to say cells. Now, with range, I give it a string, a collection of characters that the interpreter can figure out which cell I'm talking about, or which range I'm talking about. Here, I'm going to give it a row and a column. So let's say I want row number 3, column number 8. So that should be H. That should be column H3. And I can change now some properties of that. Let me change the value of that. Cells 3, 8. I was kind of expecting to get some ItaliCs here. I'll help you with the dot. I'm surprised that didn't show up. Equals, let me just put like 100. So now, if I run that code, I should be able to come over here and look at H3 and see that I put a value of 100 in that cell. Incidentally, let's take a look at some other options to do that. Let's do this. Let's do a range, and let's do H4 colon H5, so 2-cell range. I'll set the value of that one to, say, 25. Now, this seems a little bit strange. I am setting the value property of how many cells? 2 cells. Do you think Excel can figure out what I'm talking about here? Yeah, it's going to say, well, there are 2 cells here. You must mean to set the value property of each one of the cells in that range. Well, let's do this one. Range. Let's see, H4, H5, H6. Dot. Now we're going to change a different property. The property we're going to change now is going to be the formula. So that's going to equal, and then in quotes, I'll put the formula that I want that to be. Now, I just wanted to sum the 3 cells right above. So what do I type? What would I type in the cell if I wanted to sum those 3 cells? Yeah, equals sum. This looks really weird in VBA. But inside the quotes is what I have to put what the formula is. Equals sum, and then I put H3 to H5. H3 colon H. The part that looks weird about this is equal, quote, equal. But these 2 equals are totally different from each other. This equal sign is an assignment statement. It is saying take whatever's on the right-hand side and put it over here on the left-hand side. This equal is just what I would have to put into that formula to make it do what it wants to do. Yeah?
So say if you did range H6 dot values value equals quote equals sum, whatever, would you put in a string of that and not the value of the formula?
Good question. What if we put value instead of formula here? It would act, Excel is kind of smart enough to figure out, oh, you're putting a formula into the value. It will actually write it into the formula property. Yeah. If you really want to have an equal sign, you have to just start with a single quote and tell it, hey, this is just text. Don't try to evaluate. There's another question over here. Yeah.
It was the same one, but now I'm going to ask, what's the difference between value and formula?
Aha! I'll show you in just a minute. In fact, let's do this. Let's just go ahead now and do a debug.print. I'm going to put value of H6. Concatenate that on with range H6. Dot value. And then let's do a formula of H6. And we'll ask for a formula. Okay, so we're going to go through now and write a value into that cell, put 2 more into here, put a formula, and then we're going to print out the value of the formula. Okay, so here's the 2 that we just most recently wrote out. So when I ask for the formula back, it actually shows me what the formula is in that cell. When I ask for the value back, it tells me what that evaluates to. See the difference? Okay. It turns out in the very early days of Visual Basic, we actually had to put another keyword on the front of these. I'm going to show it to you just kind of for edification. It will be interesting when we start working with object variables later in the course. But we used to have to start these off with the keyword let, which really changes this in to kind of a full command. Let range H6.formula equal some new value. Actually, I kind of like writing it this way because it feels like the voice of God, doesn't it? Let the range take on this value. And then it just does. Turns out we just got tired of typing let all the time, and so it still works. It still runs. It just doesn't what we need longer. Let range 5. Okay. Okay, now there are other properties that we can play with. Here's the part that gets a little more complex. A property can be, what we've seen here is properties can be just primitive values, right? This is, I'm putting a property in here of 25, that's just a number. I'm printing a property in here of this collection of characters into the formula property. But a property can itself also be more complex. It can be an object itself. Let's take a look. Debug.print. You know, it's kind of tough up here without the light. I need to get a backlit key. Debug.print. Okay, so let's just say range B1 dot font. There it is. Font is a property of the range. It's great. Like print the font. What do we expect that to print? Look here. Here's B1. What should we think it should print? Yeah, maybe Calibri. I don't know. Let's give it a shot and see what it prints. It prints nothing. Debug. And it's kind of a bad error message. Object doesn't support this property or method. It turns out it does. See, look. Who asked the question earlier? Even VBA can't tell if it's a property or method. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. It turns out it can support it. It's just not the end. I can't print a font because the font itself is an object, and it has properties. By the way, how could you tell? I mean, when I got right here, font, it just looks like a regular old property. So how can I tell if that property is a primitive, something I can just assign a value to, or if itself is an object, a more complex thing? Yeah, type a period right after it. And if something else comes up, it's an object. If nothing else comes up, you're done. There's nothing else to put in there, at least as far as IntelliSense has figured out what's going on. So if you hit a dot and a list comes up, you know that's got to be an object. The sad news is you get some pretty long, complex statements that the editor can't really tell anymore. It's like it gives up trying to figure out if it knows what you're talking about. And so your IntelliSense just kind of stops working. But at least on short ones, you're okay. Okay, so what have I got here? I got all things. Oh, look, there's a name property. Now, is that an object or is that primitive? Hit a dot. Nothing else. I think that's going to be okay. So now I'll run that, and it prints out Calibri. So that's kind of the next level of complexity here, is that properties can themselves be objects. Questions here? Okay. How are you feeling about properties? How many are going, I think I get it. It's not too bad, I think I get it. How many of you are going, you know, I should have had this class yesterday because I could have dropped the class. So, yesterday. They moved up the drop deadline. Like it used to be a couple of days longer. When did they move it up? You know? It was maybe a year or two. Okay. So let's take a closer look at some different methods. Let me do another sub-procedure, so we're getting kind of long on this one. Sub-method. I was wondering why they put the 0 and the O right next to each other on the keyboard. Yeah, it's true. Some of this look, hey, really are. All right, so let's do active cell dot offset. Offset is a method or a property? Look at the icon. Property. It's a property. So here's one thing that's going to give us a little more complexity, that sometimes even properties can take parameters telling them how to behave. So offset, and then I got to tell it how many rows and how many columns to offset. So we will offset 1 row and 0 columns. I'll hit a dot there, and oh look, I got properties, so that returns an object. Any thought on which kind of object it returns? Yeah, maybe it's a cell or a range. Folks, I don't know if I've ever taught my class this before. This has never come up before. There's a way you can tell. There is a statement that is absolutely fabulous for answering that question. I wonder what kind of object that thing returns, or what that returns. This do this. Let's do a debug.print. And there's a function, it's part of the language, called type name. So inside the parentheses for the type name function, I've put a reference to some thing. And this is a method that returns an object. And so I just want to know what kind it is. That will actually tell me the name of that object, what type of object it is. It tells me that's returning a range object. Whew, that's great. So even if I just active cell, now that should print range twice because those are both identifying range objects. That's a range, that's a range. If I change this to activecell.font, then that should tell me what kind of object that font object is. It's a font object. Okay, so comment here, type name returns is a function that returns. The name of kind of object. Let's see. It actually works for variables too. It returns the type name. I feel almost as capable as a Microsoft help file writer. Oh, really? It returns the type name? I never would have guessed. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to say ActiveCell.offset. That's going to refer me to a different cell. Which cell is going to refer me to? I don't know. Let's ask for the address. Right, so now when I print this,
You need 2 S's in there.
it's kind of hard to see back there, I guess. Let me darken that S in for you. So that tells me we're talking about A2. Now if I run it again, it's going to give me a different value. Let me start by putting, just visually here, it's going to print a bunch of minus signs. So you can kind of see where one run ends and the next one begins. Now I'm on A2. If I run it again, oh, still on A2. Yeah, because I haven't done anything to change what it's actually, what the active cell is. So now, print the address. Before, I'm going to refer to that cell. If we look at my active cell, by the way, what's my active cell right now? It's not A2 because what I'm printing here is I'm printing the active cell offsetting 1 row and 0 columns in the address of that cell. So A1 is my active cell right now. Now, just before this, I'm going to say, okay, this then refers to A2 when active cell is A1. And I'm going to say dot select. So now, someone talk me through this statement. What is this going to do? I'm on some active cell. Let's call it A1. Go ahead.
Doesn't it go 1 row down and no columns over and then creates a new active cell?
It creates a new active cell is a really weird way to say it, but yeah. So I'm going to say it in a way that kind of is more clear in the lingo of objects. So here, this active cell just refers to a cell, whichever one's active. We don't care. Just some active cell. This one then is going to say, this method says whatever the active cell is, let's return a reference to the cell that's right below it. And so everything right up to here refers to the cell that's right below the active cell. And then I'm calling this method on that cell. And what does this method do? It selects that cell. It makes that cell the active cell. It's not creating a new cell. It's the same one. There's a cell right there. That's going to be the active cell. So now when I run this, it should print A2 the first time, and then A3, and then A4, because it actually changes which cell is active. And if we look at the code, it's actually moving me down. I'm on A9 right now. Moving me down to A15. Okay. I wonder what other methods you want to play with. I wonder what dirty does. I really get any kind of wondering about dirty.
We looked it up.
Oh, yeah?
It designates a range to be recalculated the next time.
Ah, that makes sense.
everything
Tells it that, hey, something's changed here, even though maybe it hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's just
It's just a
recalculated.
lot in access because it checks to see if like it tracks your data changes and it must set dirty defaults to make sure
Yeah.
you uncheck.
That's a data. We're familiar with the term dirty in the database context. Yeah, because it's where it may be that the value that's displayed is out of sync with the value that's actually restored in the database, and that's a very similar thing that's going on. Okay, active cell dot. What other methods do we have here? Allocate changes. Oh yeah, here's a good one. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to come and change my date so that it's not quite wide enough. Can't actually show the dates. Column B isn't wide as it needs to be. So let's now say range B1 dot. And what I'd like to do is I want to auto size that column. I just want to tell you, you know what? Make it fit. Auto fit the column. Trouble is, there's no auto fit. Oh, there is. It's a trap, though. Watch this. It's a trap. Oh, you know what? My daughters were watching Studio C last night. And there's some guy that keeps showing up. He's from Star Wars. It's a trap. He's like on 3 different things. Okay. No. It's a trap. It really is. So this looks pretty good. Dot auto fit. Why did I delete it? Dot auto fit. It's a method. I got the little green block flying through the air. Looks great. Let's run and see what happens. Auto fit method of range class failed. Ugh. The reason is I'm telling that one cell to auto fit. What would that look like if I auto fit that cell but didn't auto fit all the rest of them? It would like bump the column over and leave some blank space in the column. That'd be hideous. It actually might not be too bad, but it's not what I expect Excel to do. And so it turns out that all the VBA editor knows is it says, oh, I can figure that out. That's a range object. Range objects have this thing auto fit. This method called auto fit. It turns out auto fit doesn't work on all ranges. What kind of range does it have to be to do auto fit? Either a whole column or a whole row. You can't just do one cell. No problem. Watch this. Dot entire column. So there is a property called entire column. So whatever cell I'm on, if I call the entire column property, what do you think it's going to return? What type is it going to return? It's going to return a range. It just happens to be a range that has all those cells in it. And now I can call the auto-fit method on that, and it should work just fine. So stop this, run it again, no error, and it has auto-fit. So there's a method called auto-fit of the range object, but it doesn't apply to all range objects. It's got to be kind of a whole set of a column or a row. Whew. So we're doing some complicated things here. We're starting off with an object. We are referring to a property that returns a different object, and then from there we're calling a method of that object. Yes?
Could you have selected the range of the column and then left out the entire column and auto-fitted that?
Oh, yeah, here's the question. So the question is, hey, couldn't we have just done a more sophisticated range here? Right? Could we just say, if I want to refer to a whole column just in a cell formula, how do we do it? Yeah, B colon B. I can do the same thing here. Colon B. Dot auto fit.
You do debug, auto fit, or have a column dot address to get the address as well.
I didn't quite follow that. Stand by for just a second. So the question is this code going to work okay, and is it actually going to auto fit? And the answer is yes. It will work just fine. I totally expected that to work. Why didn't it work? That's the whole column. Interesting.
Did we not select it? We have to select it.
No, you don't know because we did it. We did this one before, and it didn't. We didn't ever select it here. totally expected that to work because it's referring to exactly the same range. But no, it looks like you got to get formally to one of the things that returns the entire column. Interesting. I didn't know. There's another question over here. Yeah.
Is there a way to select the entire spreadsheet model for it?
Yes.
How do you do it?
Oh, yeah. It's actually really easy. So let's look. Oh, we don't have it showing here. So that's that one. Okay. So you're familiar with cells. CELLS. So with cells, I typically give it, a row and a column. Whoa. That refers to one cell. But if I don't tell it which row and which column, it just says, oh, all the cells. Now the question is, can I auto-fit it? Now, I don't know. This probably won't work.
You have a sheet.
Hold on a second. Because, I don't know. I've never tried this before. I'm pretty sure it's not going to hurt my computer if I try to execute this line. So we're going to do it and see what it does. But what are we trying to tell it to do? Are we trying to tell it to auto-fit the columns or auto-fit the rows? Auto-fit. My guess is this is going to fail just like this one did before. But let's find out. I've been wrong before. In fact, I was wrong really recently. Yeah, getting here no good. So, but here I can come and say all the cells dot entire column dot autofit, and that should now fit all of the autofit all the columns. Looks like it did autofit these out here as well. So it looks like it takes 2 steps to do it if I want to autofit the rows, all the rows, and the columns for the whole worksheet.
Columns without autofit.
Oh, hey, does that work? Did you try it? Oh, the TA is over there like Googling. It's a question. Is the TA in Google smarter than the professor? Yeah, without question. The answer to that is yes. So, yeah, so could we do it with a shorter statement? Columns dot autofit. I don't know. Maybe so. Yeah, looks like that executes okay as well. Autofit all the columns. Incidentally, you can specify a particular column just similar to you can with cells. I want to autofit column number 4. That would let me just autofit that 4. Questions? Yeah.
Does the columns, I guess, object take a letter argument, for example, if you didn't know which calculating?
Oh, could you just put a letter in there? The answer is you can't just put a letter, but you could probably put a string. I want to autofit column A. It'll probably take that okay. Yeah. In fact, on cells up here, you can do the same thing. The row number is 3, column number is 8, or I can put that in quotes as an H, and that refers to the same cell. You can't put a letter for this one, but you can put it for the row, but you can put it for the column. My sense is if you're going to do that with the column, why don't you just do range H3? The reason having these as numbers is helpful because we can actually use those as variables. We'll talk about variables later. We can have one line of code that's in a loop that executes lots of times and does something different each time it executes because we're changing which cell and which row and which column is. Okay, we got other stuff to move on to. So let's take a look now at some things we can do with sheets. Let's look at some worksheets. Sheets demo. Okay, so this now is going to introduce us a little more clearly to the idea of an object as well as a collection of objects. Here's the tough thing. A collection of objects is itself an object. Remember, an object is a thing that I can manipulate through code. A range is a thing I can manipulate through code. And so let's first talk about the collection of all the worksheets in the workbook. How many are there? There's only one. That's pretty boring. I'm going to give myself a few more. So I've got now sheet 1 through sheet 4. So the worksheets collection is the collection of all the worksheets in the workbook. So I can now here say worksheets dot, and because this is an object, it's got methods and properties. There's not very many of them compared to the range. I mean, I can see them here in just a couple of little screens of my IntelliSense window. One of them here is count. And every collection, so a collection is a particular kind of object. It's just an object that holds references to other objects. So here's an object that says, oh, you want to refer to one of the sheets in this worksheet? You can use the Worksheets Collection to refer to it. I'll do a debug.print of worksheets.count. It's the French spelling. And that should tell me just how many worksheets there are in this workbook. Ooh. Incidentally, how does it know that it needs this workbook? I can have a couple of workbooks open. Let's open up another workbook. File, new, blank workbook. I got 2 of them. How does it know which workbook I'm talking about?
Doesn't it always assume that active workbook?
That's a good question. Does it assume the active workbook, or does it assume the workbook that the code is on? It assumes the active workbook. So right now, I've got my book 2 as my active workbook. And so if I execute this code, it gives me a 1. If I activate my other workbook and run it, it gives me a 4. So folks, this one is kind of dangerous to leave bare. Because almost all, well, at least for the stuff we do in this class, you mean for this code to execute on the workbook that has the code. And so here's one of the things we're going to do, is we're going to add in this workbook. Just like there's an active cell that says, hey, whatever cell is active, there's also an active workbook. It says, hey, whatever workbook is active, that's an object. That workbook object has a collection of worksheets in it. I want to know how many worksheets are in that collection that are in this workbook. Actually, they're in the active workbook. So let's put a comment in here. Active workbook refers to whichever, to the most recently activated workbook. This workbook refers to the workbook that contains the currently executing code. So when I say this workbook, I'm talking about the workbook wherever this statement is saved, whichever workbook this statement is saved in, that's the workbook I'm talking about. Get it? Incidentally, we can actually ask how many workbooks there are. Because workbooks is a collection of all the workbooks. Yes. So this should print 2, and then it should print, whichever one's active. It should print 1 worksheet in the active workbook, and then 4 worksheets in this one. 2, 1. Okay. Here's another thing that I can almost always do with collections. Your collection is a special kind of object that just kind of holds references to other objects. I can almost always create a new instance in that collection. Right now, how many workbooks are there in the workbooks collection? Workbooks is the collection of all open workbooks in this instance of Excel. Have you ever noticed how sometimes you can have 2 separate instances of Excel open? This was much more clear back in the days of Excel 2010. When you had Excel open and then all of your worksheets kind of lived inside that window. I could have 2 Excels open with their own sets of worksheets. Any of you ever noticed that back in the day? Yeah.
It was a pain during work. Last summer that would happen. But it was like hard. You'd have to pull them up separately to have them like up next to each other.
Yeah. And so I guess enough people agreed that Microsoft said, you know what, just make all workbooks kind of free and roaming. Now it's hard to tell which instances of Excel. They have multiple instances of Excel open, and that still happens. It's just not nearly as clear as to which worksheet belongs into which instance of Excel. So the workbooks then refers to all of the workbooks that are open in that instance of Excel. For us, we're only going to have one instance of Excel open at a time. So we'll know which instance we're talking about. Okay, but watch this. I'll add one right here. Workbooks dot add. That's all I have to do. It's a method. It will create a new workbook, and it'll put that workbook in this one. So incidentally, that will also be now the active workbook. So that will add it. Count is now going to be 3. Active sheet, active workbook is going to be 1, because it'll be a brand new added workbook. And then this workbook's still going to have 3. So it should say count should be 3, 1, 4. And we'll see now that I've got 3 workbooks open. Okay. Now we've added that workbook. Now let's add a few more worksheets into that workbook. Active workbook. Dot worksheets. Dot add. And you know what, let's keep that like a bunch of times. So now this code says, make a brand new workbook. It will be the active workbook. So whatever workbook was active before, when I create a new workbook, it becomes the active workbook. And now, with that active workbook, I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sheets. We should have 7 sheets. So incidentally, I can now print active workbook dot worksheets dot count. Maybe I better put a label on that. Number of sheets in that workbook, 7. There are now 4 workbooks open. Active workbook has 7 sheets. Oh yeah, this is where and then this workbook still has 4 sheets.
Can you just do worksheets.add instead of active workbook?
So if I just refer to the worksheets collection without telling it which workbook I'm talking about, which one is it going to assume? It assumes the active workbook. Yeah, so that would be okay. I could add a new sheet to a different workbook, right? I could add one to this workbook. So now I've got 5 in this workbook. Still 7 in the newly created workbook, and now I've got 5 workbooks open. Question?
Could you do it by like the name of the workbook instead of by?
Yes! That's like the next step, right? There's other ways we can refer to these workbooks. So far, all we've done it, we know we can get to the active one, or we can go to the one that has the code. But now I've got like 5 of these things open. I can only get to 2, the one that's active and the one that has the code. So how do I refer to the others? Here's how we can do it. There are several ways to refer to it. I'm going to play with this code in the immediate window. Debug.print. And now here, I'm just going to say workbooks dot count. It should tell me I've got 5 of them. But now I can refer to one of them by its number. Number 1. This now refers to one of the workbooks in the workbooks collection. Which one does it refer to? The first one that was open in this current set. Which one is that?
This workbook.
Yes, it's the same one as this workbook, which is called employee schedule. In fact, we could add, there are lots of properties of this. I can hit the dot. Here's the properties now that a workbook has. One of them is the name. And I can just refer to the name of them. And that should now print the name of that incidentally. There's also a property called path. It'll tell me where that workbook is. Where is that workbook saved on the disk? Here's the neat trick, folks. With collections of objects that are named, not all collections of objects have names. But for objects that are in a collection and those objects have names, I can refer to them not just by their number, but by their name. It has to be a string literal. It can be a string variable. We'll talk about variables later. That should now still tell me the path of that workbook. I might have to tell it that .xls is. So that still finds the workbook, and then it tells us the path where it's in. This works for worksheets as well. So debug.print the workbooks. Okay, so this gets me to a particular workbook. There's a collection of worksheets here. Worksheets, I want the first worksheet, and then I want its name. That first worksheet is called Sheet 5. Now, the order of the workbooks in the workbook collection is the order in which those workbooks were opened. The order of the worksheets in the worksheets collection is the order in which those worksheets are in the workbook. So the very first one is sheet number 5, and so that's number 1. If I move this somewhere else, it's no longer the first one. Now the first one is sheet 1. And so if I run this, it should tell me sheet 1. And incidentally, given the name, I can refer to it by its name as well. So I can refer to worksheets either by their ordinal position or by their name. It's like a weird thing to say, show me the name of the worksheet named sheet 1. Should be some other property I can look at. Some kind of sheet color or tab color. And IntelliSense has, I've gone too far for IntelliSense. I can't figure out what I'm talking about. So let me do it in a simpler version. Still too far. Okay. Seems like there was some tab colors. I don't remember. Seems like the name is the main one I'm interested in. What are the other properties here? Rows. Oh, you saw how many rows there are in the worksheet? That's pretty boring. There's a code name. Hey, a worksheet has a code name. Code name. It's the code name for this worksheet. Comments. Creator. I can ask who the creator is. I have no idea what that's going to put. Apparently the creator is. If you ever wanted to know who the creator was, there he is.
We haven't saved it yet, right?
Yeah, this one's been saved. So this is employee schedule. Yeah. Okay, how are we doing, folks? So the key here is that collections of objects are ways for me to refer to workbooks in a collection, worksheets in a collection, or even shapes. We want that like 10 minutes, and I was going to try to actually create some shapes. Let's go ahead and try to see if we can do that. So to introduce us to shapes, I'm going to come to sheet 1, which has this data in it. We may not actually get to where we're creating shapes that are the lengths of these times. But let's just record ourselves drawing a line. Let's give it a shot. So record, macro number 1. You can either watch what I do and then type what it records, or you can record it yourself. Your pick. Macro number 1 is a great name for it. And I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to come to my Insert tab. And I'm going to insert a shape. And I'm going to insert a line. So here's a line. Come in here and draw it. It's kind of a thin line. So let me go ahead and format it. Still recording this. Formatting the shape. The line is like half a point. Now let's make it like 2 points. You can put some ends on it. Begin arrow type, circle, end arrow type, circle. Yeah, I guess that's enough. And we'll stop. So it's given me that. So I recorded the statement that's going to create that line. Now, each time I start recording, after opening a workbook, it's going to put all my recorded macros into a new module. So I created a module, and because I started recording, it's going to have created another module for those newly recorded macros. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to find employee schedule, and here are those two modules. Module 1 is the one I have open already, and module 2 is the one that was just created. And so here's the statement that adds that shape. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and work with this right here in macro. So this says active sheet. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this line continuation character. What the macro recorder does, if that line starts to get too long, it says, you know what? Let's go ahead and put this onto 2 lines. Normally in VBA, it's 1 line per statement. If you want a statement, it's just 1 line. If you want to continue a statement onto 2 lines, you have to put the line continuation character. It's actually a space followed by the underscore. Then it'll go, okay, we're ready to continue the line. I'm just going to get rid of that and bring up the next line. So this actually is all part of the same statement. Do we understand that? So here's the statement. This is really kind of interesting what it's doing. With the active sheet, referring to the shapes collection, it's going to call the add connector method. The add connector method takes these arguments, and right up to here, it creates that shape, and it returns a reference to that shape. Then, because this will evaluate to an object, the object that was just created. Do you see what the recorder did? It then said that object, select it, make it the active object. A shape does not become active just because you create it, you've got to select it. This really is complex, but this part evaluates to an object, it has to create it, and then it evaluates to it, returns that object, and then we select it. I'm going to do something a little different here. No, I better not. It's kind of, it would make the code a lot cleaner, but it would just be magical to you because we haven't talked about what a variable is. Okay, so that's going to create that shape. So I can control where it goes with this right here. And I think this is probably like a top left, maybe it's x1, y1, x2, y2. That's probably what it is. So, you know, I'm like 100 points away from each other here and just a few here. Remember, it's a little bit slanted? So let me go ahead and change this to be 198. So now my 2 y dimensions are going to be the same. This should give me a perfectly horizontal line. Then, because this is selected, I can do stuff with the selection. I'm changing, well, it's telling me that it's visible. It was visible already. But we're changing the weight to 2. And then, with the shape of the selection, referring to the line object, it has a property called begin arrowhead style. We're telling it to be oval. And the end arrowhead style is oval. So now if I run this, it should create a new shape on this sheet. There it is, vertically horizontal. So with a little math now, I can decide where to place this vertically by putting these 2 parameters to be the same number. That'll make it horizontal, but where they are is how high it will be. And then where it starts and where it stops. Now let me figure out exactly where to place them. So, and we really can't do it in the next 5 minutes, but the idea is to say, well, where do we want this one to start? We start on whatever row that it's on here. And then how long is it? Well, it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. It's 5 hours long. So we've got to somehow convert 5 hours into a number that's somehow in this range. I don't want to make 5 because this thing's how long is this thing? It's like 130 right now. So if I make it 5, it's going to be tiny. And if I make it minutes, 5 times 60, it would be really long. So I probably have to scale it somehow. But by just controlling what numbers, calculating what numbers I want to put in here, I can build that whole chart of where those shapes go. Yes?
Are you able to select this location with like an offset command? Offset from an active cell?
The question is, could I select it? Can I somehow offset from that cell? Offset doesn't do it, but I could tell it to put it, yes, we'll end with that. Let me tell it to put this on the active cell. In fact, I'm going to put it just to the right of the active cell. So if this is the active cell, it's going to come right over here. All right, so this is my top. Let me go ahead and, I don't know about variables yet, so I'm going to go ahead and write it right in here. It's going to get a little bit ugly. Active cell. So active cell, the cell has a property called top, and it tells me how far it is down the worksheet. It's the same scale that I would use for creating this shape. Give myself a little more width here. And since I want it to be horizontal, active cell.top. I'm going to actually put it at the left, just because the code will be shorter. I'm going to put it right at the very left of the active cell. So this is going to start at the active cell's left.
Then you go like dot right or.
There is no dot right property. There's a width property. And so I could make this the active cell's left plus the active cell's width, or just the active cell's left plus 100. Because ultimately what I would want it to do is I would want it to figure out where to put it to start based on where the start is, and then the length to be the difference between these two. So that now should put that line wherever the active cell is. I'm on that one. I guess I am going to break this onto 2 separate lines. So I put it there. I put the active cell there. And that puts it there. If I want that to show up, kind of horizontally in the line, well, I've got a height of the cell. I could just say the top plus the height divided by 2, and that would put it right horizontally there. So this is a great thing for VBA because this allows us to now kind of increase our ability to visualize stuff with VBA or with Excel, because we can use these other shapes that we can just drop in. There's now a collection of shapes on this sheet. It has 4 items. I could name these shapes if I wanted to, just by saying the .name property. And then I can refer to them either by their ordinal position or by their name, just the way I do with worksheets or workbooks. Questions here? Okay. It seems like we still don't have homework to do until like a week from today. So it might be good if some of you would actually try the homework and see if you can get to work, because the first time you do it, it's actually always a little bit weird. All right. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. I will see you on Monday. That's an MBA tradition, by the way. So half of you are in an IS class when you go on your clapping. Those of you who are like in an MBA class are asking, how come these guys aren't clapping? This is a mixed class here, so you should probably just all clap. It would make me feel better anyway. Thanks, folks. See you next time.